In this unit on wellness and ritual healing, the two articles and the film collectively help us see that people's ideas about health and well-being are best understood in relationship to larger patterns in culture and social relations. They suggest that people intuit the connection between body and mind. They intuit, in other words, that social and mental turmoil contribute to physical illness, and vice versa, that physical illness has socio-emotional manifestations as well. These pieces suggest that when people seek out health care, they might hope to be treated holistically with concern for body, mind, and spirit. In this recap, I want to highlight key ideas of each of the sources and then discuss the picture that emerges from their combination. First, let's talk about Robert Desjardins' article, Healing Through Images, the Magical Flight and Healing Geography of Nepali Shamans. Desjardins describes how Nepali shamans utilize imagery about movement through a healing geography, or an imaginary landscape, to move the patient from an experience of sickness to one of wellness. Desjardins borrows Tausig's term when he calls the Nepali shaman an imagician, or a magician who works through the manipulation of images. Through movements of his body and physical objects, and by charting a path for the patient to follow in their mind's eye, the shaman helps the patient feel as though they are moving from a state of illness to one of wellness. Although Desjardins does not use this term, the healing practices that the Nepali shamans use are an example of guided imagery, which is increasingly used in biomedical healing practices as well. To explain, the shamans, through chants and songs, describe a healing geography, which includes both actual places that are known to local Nepalese and also supernatural locations, such as the underworld. The shamans describe themselves as magically moving through this landscape on a, quote, magical flight, unquote, in order to diagnose the patient's problem. For example, the shaman may discover that the patient's illness was caused by the soul having been dragged into the waters of forgetfulness, or being trapped inside a castle, or having been attacked by an ancestor ghost at the crossroads, or being lost inside the jungle where many malevolent spirits dwell. Then the shaman describes himself moving through the imagined landscape to, for example, go up the inner mountain snowfields and receive a vision, or to call upon the goddesses of rocks, valleys, soils, and rivers to see if the soul has been trapped there, to find and rescue the lost soul, to release the soul from the fortress, to walk down the right mountain path, to climb the ladder through the 7 celestial realms, etc. Again, Desjardins uses Tausig's term of imagician to refer to the fact that the shaman operates by conjuring images of a healing geography and moving the patient's focuses from images of sickness to images of healing. In addition, the shaman sometimes uses symbolic objects and symbolic actions to mirror and thereby reinforce the imagery he is creating. For example, on pages 292 to 293, Desjardins notes that the shamans will sometimes construct their altars so that they resemble the imaginary world that the shaman is describing. The altar might include, for example, effigies that represent gods or spirits, or a ladder representing the various celestial realms that the shaman will ascend through during the magical flight. As an example of symbolic actions used to reinforce the shaman's imagery, on page 300, he quotes another anthropologist's description of one ceremony. Quote, "The figure of a demon on horseback is made of dough and painted yellow to symbolize its evil nature. At night, the shaman's assistant puts the demon in a tiny boat on the river where it floats away. Meanwhile, the shaman sits in the house beating his drum, and he describes step by step the itinerary of the horse and its rider until it reaches Jomtotya Bridge, about 10 miles downriver. The evil has been eradicated, end quote. Desjardins concludes that the symbolic performance that parallels the shaman's description of a magical reality reinforces the feeling that the ritual is effectively moving the patient from sickness toward wellness. As he says on pages 300 to 301, quote, "It is this combination of physical performance and the metaphorical movement through geographical space that makes the shaman's actions so efficacious," end quote. One sentence that summarizes the article as a whole is given on page 290. Quote, "The shaman transforms the experiential world of his patient by evoking, manipulating, and interpreting distinct geographical images in order to both represent experiences of illness and present novel ones of healing and health," end quote. Now let's consider Melissa Cheney's article, Reinscribing the Birthing Body, Home Birth as Ritual Performance. In it, she shows how U.S. home birth midwives act to reinscribe or redefine childbirth and the mother's body through a series of ritualized practices as they care for mother and child. One valuable insight we can take from this article is that even though rituals always draw upon traditions, they use symbols and meanings from the past, they are not always traditional. By this I mean that their final forms and the meanings and values they communicate might be relatively new or counter-hegemonic, meaning that they go against the mainstream. Such is the case here, as Cheney says that several of these midwifery practices aim to reclaim childbirth from a medical system in which women have been trained to look to medical doctors and technological fixes for all the answers. Instead, midwifery practices subtly encourage women to recognize childbirth as a natural process rather than a sickness calling for a medical cure, and to trust their own bodies and their own instincts. She introduces her argument in this way on page 520, quote, "Home birth midwives explicitly manipulate ritual in an attempt to communicate the sufficiency of nature over the supremacy of technology, replacing mechanistic views of the body and birth with the language of connection, celebration, power, transformation, and of mothers and babies as inseparable units," end quote. These ideas are introduced through a variety of ritualized practices, including involving the partner and other children in the process, empowering the mother to squat upright and trust her body about when to push, solidifying the mother-infant bond in the immediate postpartum period by giving the baby to the mother right away, having the mother call the baby back as it is being resuscitated, and delaying cutting the umbilical cord and then honoring the placenta once it is expelled. Throughout the entire process, therefore, the midwives are redefining birth as natural, women as creators of healthy children, and the home as the locus of a cooperative, united family. Similarly, the film Planet Yoga shows us how the ritual yoga practices are based upon the idea of the union of body and spirit. We see there are variations in yoga practice, and we look in on the practices of gurus in Canada, India, and even a French religious historian. The health benefits of yoga have been established scientifically and include cardiovascular benefits, improvements in strength, flexibility, balance, and sleep, reductions of stress, anxiety, and depression, and greater awareness and appreciation of one's body, which lead to other healthy practices. Yet, to reduce yoga to a physical practice or a form of exercise would be to miss its other dimensions. Yoga entails physical and spiritual health simultaneously. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, meaning unite, especially to, quote, unite body and mind, humanity, and cosmos, end quote. This is my interpretation, but I suspect that one of the ways in which yoga brings about a sense of holistic or whole body well-being is that the practice involves aligning body and mind. Imagery, or what one sees in the mind's eye, is of critical importance. Yoga aligns body and mind by having the body make poses that correspond to certain shapes. Imagery and embodiment are coordinated and therefore harnessed simultaneously. As one example, an important set of images in yoga is that of doors, gates, and paths. For example, in the film, the French religious scholar says, quote, "You're asked to walk step by step through this inner self, your progress through your body, through your mind, toward a certain form of liberation," end quote. She adds, quote, "It's a path to the self, absolutely, that runs through a series of doors linked to our inner barriers and our ignorance. There are always barriers and doors that open when you put in the effort," end quote. The idea of opening doors corresponds with different poses in yoga, such as the gate pose, Parigasana. The body moves in ways that mirror the images upon which the mind is focused. Similarly, balance is important in yoga, and it has mental and embodied manifestations. Balance is both a mental image of an ideal, and the body gains practice in balance as the many destabilizing poses require the practitioner to activate many fine muscles. One of the Canadian instructors says, quote, "How am I supposed to live in my body in balance and harmony? We have to start with our own body," end quote. He says, quote, "You know the carpenter's bubble where they put the bubble in the middle? Well, think of that bubble point as what yoga's looking for. Breathe, and your mind changes because of the mind-body link. And yoga says the link to the mind and the body is the breath. So postures and breathing help us to get comfortable in our body, get to the balance point," end quote. Other poses reflect the coordination of mind and body in yoga, as the poses bear names that correspond to their shapes. Mind and body, therefore, become centered upon the same image. For example, in the film, we see the sun salutation, Surya Namaskar, in which the body goes through a set of movements that represent greeting the sun. As the practitioner proceeds through these movements, they are simultaneously thinking about what it would look like to greet the sun. In the film, we also saw the tree pose, Vrikshasana, cat pose, Bidalasana, child's pose, Balasana, and the lotus, Padmasana. In addition, in the film, we see that the yoga instructors often utilize imagery to guide proper postures and breathing. For example, the first yoga instructor in the film says, quote, "Now with the tailbone into that space again, soften the heart towards the earth. Inhale and just lift the heart," end quote. Her words create mental pictures, softening the heart, lifting the heart, that guide people toward proper postures. Again, mind and body are united through concentrated focus upon an image. It is not surprising, therefore, that yoga can bring about a sense of both physical and mental well-being. If I were a healthcare worker, I might come away from these pieces with a few takeaway ideas. When people feel ill, They might be looking for more than just a technical fix to a physical ailment. They might also be plagued by fraught social relationships or feelings of oppression. They might have corresponding mental troubles. In addition to physical relief in a clinical setting, they might also be craving experiences that would help them evaluate their social relationships, empower them to trust their own instincts, give them hope within the context of oppression, and cultivate optimism. Healthcare workers, therefore, might think about not just how to fix something technically, but to be sensitive to how clients might think about health, whether in relationship to colonization, patriarchy, fractured interpersonal relationships, the spiritual world, and not simply brush them off as non-scientific or irrelevant. There may be an entire history behind people's beliefs about health. Being sensitive to those beliefs and aiming to treat the person holistically, considering body and mind simultaneously, would be more productive and introduce trust in the healing process. That's all for now. Now into our next topic.